Hey guys, today I want to talk a little bit about Orphea. Orphea, in my opinion, has been one of the most dominant mages in Storm League, in my opinion. Not necessarily in her popularity. I think KT in the lower ends tops that, and I want to say like these days Asmo and Mephisto tend to top it in the higher end. But I personally, when I was doing a Bronze Masters in Assassin, I think that it was probably one of my hardest Bronze Masters, purely because I had a hard time getting Assassin in the lower rank, and because I still wanted to make sure that we had a good team comp. And in the higher rank, they're just tanks didn't want to go in when they should, and healers tend not to be healer mains, and so their numbers were just a little rough. So I really liked Orphea for a few reasons, and gets dropped immediately. I really liked Orphea for a few reasons in Storm League, and one is because you didn't really need to rely on a healer. She had self-healing, and if you go her trait build or her trait W build, when you get to 13, you're going to be getting a big shield, and you're going to be getting maximum chaos, which means a bigger heal. And so you didn't really need a healer. You could kind of just keep yourself alive and still do incredible damage, as she is a very high burst damage mage with a lot of sustained damage as well. Also, one little trick here. He's not pushing this wave out because there's no enemies here, and so he's letting the minions die. He's collecting the soak, and the enemy team's not getting any soak. This isn't necessarily freezing. Freezing's usually about letting the wave stay over here and keeping a bigger wave on the enemy side than your side, and then just letting the minions attack you. But it's kind of a form of freezing. And so he's just keeping it here in the beginning to keep his team in the game. I also like this game because they start off really behind, so it kind of shows some of these heroes when they get behind. That being said, so this match, by the way, if you guys didn't see the last video, this match is another match part of the CCL, like, player spotlight thing, but in this particular case, all of the players that were, all the free agents for CCL were allowed to make a team with whoever they want to, that as long as the person that they want to was a free agent as well. So, ACA, or Got Filth, Advince, Valimar, Kelsier, J, they basically just rebuilt ACA from Storm Division, except for instead of their current healer, they brought in Valimar. And that's the team that they decided to go with. The enemy team is built of a couple ex-pro players, like an Intori, Skog, as well as Pirate. And then also Hebi was on CC, so he was on, so old HEC pro players plus new pro players. I mean, I guess honestly most of their team. Granite Gaming dropped all their players, CC dropped their team, Pirate Rum was an old competitive player, and Caesar has been a competitive player for a long time. So overall, they're against a solid team. This is the finals, and so both teams have beat several teams, including old professional teams, to get to this finals. So I like Orphea, again, because you don't need to rely on a healer, but also you almost don't need to rely too much on a tank. If the tank takes a bad engage, you can go in and still use your Q to kind of get out of a bad engage. And if your tank has a good engage, Orphea has one of the best follow-ups out of the mages. She has a lot of damage that goes to the target from a decent range, and you can get up to the target very quickly because you can cast a lot of your abilities while moving. So for example, you can cast your E while moving, then you can cast your Q, which gets you close enough for your W. So it allows you to follow up someone like a Diablo very quickly from a long range, something that Jaina can't really do, and it's a lot better than someone like a Li Ming because it can't be blocked by minions. So it allows Orphea to have one of the best follow-ups to a tank's engage, compared to a lot of other heroes, or at least a lot of other mages. While also not needing a healer, because post level 13, you're going to be out healing a lot of the damage that a single DPS can do to you. You do something with, including your shielding and your healing, you do something like 400 health per second in survivability, which is awesome. But Orphea also is great because of what we're seeing right now. She has very high sustained damage in fights. So not only does she have great burst and great sustain, and great survivability and mobility, why has she not been played in the competitive environment? And this is where I really wanted to make this video, and I feel like I've brought this up before in other Mage and Orphea videos, but I do want to talk about it for a little bit. Why has Orphea not been played in the competitive scene that much? And Europe has taken her a few times. One team's used her in the solo lane as kind of a bully to specific solo laners, where she's been used a little bit in Europe as far as a mage, but she's been used very little in North America, and even pretty seldom in Europe by some of the more major teams. So what makes her not viable in the competitive scene, and what also makes it to where she's not being played as much as I think she should be played in Storm League? And that is, she is feast or famine, and if you miss an ability, you cannot function on her. Her E can be missed okay, but her E is kind of her ranged healing. Her Q, if it's missed, it's the difference between having a 5-second cooldown on an ability and a 3-second cooldown on an ability. Sorry, a 2-second cooldown on an ability. And that's a pretty major difference. Her W in the trait build is the same way. Insatiable makes it to where it sets the cooldown as a 2-second ability. So basically, if you play her well, and if everything goes your way, you have two 2-second abilities and a 14-second ability. Your 14-second ability, it just slows the enemies and does 2 sets of damage, which can be great for setting up your trade at a range. And your Q and your W allow for survivability and mobility. And if you don't miss any of them, you do more DPS than most mages do, with a ridiculous amount of healing as well. However, if you miss these abilities, or if the enemies dodge these abilities, you lose a lot of value. So she hasn't been used in the competitive scene because of this feast or famine nature. You miss your Q and you lose a lot of damage. In Storm League, W build is a lot harder to miss, so she's still pretty, I would say, consistent, seeing as it's really hard to miss a W. Even if you miss your Q, W still gains a lot of value because it's such a big ability and it drops after 0.62 seconds, which is relatively quick for how big the ability is. And so that is basically the reasons why. Now, how can teams get around this, though? This is where I like to kind of show that there's more ways around something that's inconsistent. If there's an ability that's inconsistent, there's ways to make it work. For example, Deathwing, his Q is inconsistent. It's slow. People can move away from it. But people will often draft it with Entomb so that he gets more value out of it. Another thing that people draft it with is like Mei. Mei can Ice Wall and then throw a W to stun after the Ice Wall's over, and Deathwing can start casting his Q ahead of that stun even landing. And then when the stun lands, they're going to have the breath going for the entirety of the stun. So there are ways around inconsistencies. Same thing with Eternal Feast. You can stun people in place for a while with like Entomb and drop down Eternal Feast, so that gets more value. Short stuns allow for a lot of potential for Chomp, and with a lot of short stuns and a low cooldown on Chomp, you can get a lot of value. So the big thing that Orphea lacks, her camp clear is a little slow. She has double soak, she has self-healing, she has mobility, she has sustained damage and burst damage. But yes, the inconsistency of landing her abilities as well as the camp clear is probably her two weakest areas. Even though her camp clear is not terrible, it's not as good as some other mages like Jaina. So right here, she takes Eternal Feast. Where I like to use it with Entomb, she actually takes it against Entomb to throw it onto the Leoric. Well, Leorics usually like to step up to the Entomb so that he body blocks the person that is going to be in the Entomb. Well, if she throws down the Eternal Feast every time, he has a choice. Leave Eternal Feast up the entire time taking damage, or step away from the Eternal Feast, letting her team out of the Entomb. So this actually is a really cool strategy for pushing people away from the engages that they were trying to make. You guys may also recognize Got Filth. SSK was another one of the teams that was in CCL. Got Filth made it into SSK. was on a CCL team. SSK got somewhere around, like, they usually sat around, I would say, 3rd place for the most part. I don't think they ended at 3rd place, but that's usually about where they sat. And Gotfilth was a solid mage player. Most likely going to get picked up again in CCL, so we'll see him some more. Solid player. One of the more surprising players to come into CCL, because CCL tend to pick most of the old HEC players, and Gotfilth was one of the earliest drafted non-pro players from HEC. So definitely a solid player to see just kind of pop into the scene, which was great. With that being said, though, this is what I was talking about. You miss your Q, you miss your W, and your ult, and you basically have nothing for the fight. This is why Orphea can be pretty bad. But I do like that teams are finally starting to look at Orphea in the competitive environment, because I personally still think that she has everything, and it's not like a jack of all trades, a master of none. She brings a lot of things to the table that no one else brings. She's one of the best sustained damage mages in the game. I think Mephisto is the only other one that even really competes, being as far as much sustained damage as a mage can bring. Especially in the AoE sense, because you could say, oh, well, like Falstad has sustained damage as a mage, but it's nowhere near the amount of AoE damage that like Orphea and Mephisto can bring. But what she brings that Mephisto doesn't bring, Mephisto kind of has the same problem that she has. If Mephisto doesn't hit anyone, he has like 14-second cooldowns. And so they both have the same problems. The major difference is she brings a lot more burst than Mephisto brings, where Mephisto is primarily sustained damage. So both heroes that just aren't seeing as much play as some of the other assassins. The other reason why I think she's interesting to bring in the competitive scene is because the current meta is so bruiser heavy that she's almost an anti-meta hero. You're going to generally be able to hit 1 to 2 people with Chomp because they have so many people in the front line. What we're seeing this game is a Leoric, a Hogger, and a Mei. 3 frontliners, and it's going to be relatively easy to land most of your abilities, allowing her to stay pretty high up in the damage. Even if she misses a couple abilities, it's not a big deal, because when they finally do try to just sit and fight her, she's going to be doing too much damage. So that is Orphea. Now, I picked this game in particular because it was such a difficult matchup, and they didn't have any combos. But what I want to tell teams is, if you're playing her in Storm League, I think that she's still good in a lot of situations. But if you're playing her, and you're on like let's say, an NGS or a Heroes Lounge team, think about drafting her with someone. I love Entomb with Eternal Feast, but keep in mind that Leoric isn't always going to be with your team. So this is more of a late game synergy that's really good. But also, if you've got something like a Diablo with a Malfurion, who Diablo can flip onto a Malfurion route, you can always follow up with a Dread, a Shadow Waltz, into a Chomp, into an auto attack. And you can even throw an auto attack in a little bit earlier. You can do the Dread, Shadow Waltz, auto attack, and then Chomp, and then another auto attack, because at level 13 you're going to get all of your chaos. So that'll be 2 auto attacks at full chaos. That's actually enough damage to 100-0 any backliner in the game by yourself, but with the inclusion of the Diablo auto-attacking a couple times, maybe the Malfurion auto-attacking a couple times, you can even take out any bruiser in the game, and that's without using any ultimate abilities. So, with a combo like this for short cooldown fights, and a combo like the Eternal Feast combined with like an Entomb for longer fights, Orphea can bring a lot in the competitive environment if you're playing her with an idea of how you're going to make these plays. So I do think that more people should look at Orphea, especially in the current meta. She's one of the more fun mages to play, even though she is a little feast or famine, that's okay, but she is a lot more fun, and I'd like to see a lot more of her, because I personally think that she's a little anti-meta right now, meaning that she's great at countering the current meta. So let's talk about the build that he goes. I've talked about this build 100 times, so I'm not going to go over it very much. This is the trait W build. It's the trait build. You take the trait talents at 1 and 4. This is going to make it to where you do more damage to targets that are stunned, rooted, or silenced, which again is part of the combo. And then you also slow people that are hit with that overflowing chaos. which is your trait. Level 4, your trait does more damage, which means that it also heals more. Level 16, your trait does AoE spell damage, and also ignores armor, which is great for taking out targets that will build up a little bit of armor. Mei has a build that builds a little bit of armor. Leoric has a build that builds a little bit of armor. Same thing with Tychus has some armor, so having that is really good. Level 7 and 13, you're going to lower the cooldown of your Chomp, and you're going to make it to where your Chomp gives you a shield and gives you full chaos. Level 10, you can go either ult, but in competitive, I recommend Eternal Feast because you can combo it with something. And at level 20, you generally take Eldritch Conduit, which allows you to get up to 30 spell power, which also increases the healing that you have. So right here is exactly what I'm talking about. You're going to see him chomping and gaining huge amounts of his health back, and in this particular case, he misses the chomp, but he gets away from the range in time. And he gained a big shield during that fight as well. He got a chomp, a shield that kept him alive at a very low amount of health, and then someone like Malfurion can keep him sustained. So he can survive burst damage and also deal with that sustained damage as well. So I do think that Gotfilth could practice a little bit more on Orphea. I think he brought it out because he saw the Leoric and he knew that he could ult every time that Entomb went out. But at the same time, there's so much more that you can do with Orphea, and you can bring so much more to the table with just a teeny bit more practice. And I think that's the one thing. In this particular build, Gotfilth is missing a few too many Ws, and that's okay. Because he is already known as one of the best assassin players in North America right now, so he can definitely deal with a little bit of constructive criticism, I'm sure. But yeah, Gotfilth is definitely a solid player, but I think that if he wants to bring Orphea, and again, it's the same thing. You don't bring a Samuro or a Lost Vikings to the game if you don't have a player that has a ton of practice on those heroes. I'm not saying Orphea is as difficult as those heroes, but what I am saying is that if you're not great at Orphea, you're going to definitely find yourself lacking in what you can do, and you're going to find a lot of areas where there's going to be downtime between her damage. But even with all of that being said and the amount of W's missed, we can still see Orphea is topping the damage considerably, even with someone like a Cassia, who is known for doing a good amount of consistent and sustained damage. You get to see all this benefit. The other cool part is, and again, someone like a Tychus who has to stand still a lot while attacking. And look at that burst damage when he does land a chomp, dude. So much damage, so much burst, huge shields, huge heals, and that is game. So I do think that Orphea is a mage that would work great in this meta, but she does require a little bit of a draft to make her work. You're going to need someone who can do short CCs in the early game that allows you to land chomps every time, and something in the mid to late game to get value out of Eternal Feast. If you can get those things, I think that Orphea is surprisingly good right now in the competitive scene for this meta. But with all of that being said, you need to make sure that she's drafted in the right situations. She's not just a Sylvanas or a Cassia that you can kind of just toss her into any team comp and make it work. She does require a good team to be put with her. With all of that being said, thank you guys so much for watching, and feel free to check out my other videos.